Ever wonder why a guy who seemed genuinely interested suddenly goes radio silent on your texts? Why those eyes that once sought yours now look right through you like you're invisible? Picture this scenario. You're with someone you've known for a while, having what feels like a normal conversation. But something has shifted. His gaze no longer meets yours. His responses become one-word answers. His entire body language pulls away, almost imperceptibly. It's not anger. It's not being busy. It's something far more subtle and disturbing. Calculated indifference. Sigmund Freud taught us that behind every seemingly inexplicable behavior lie powerful unconscious forces at work. When a man ignores you, he's not simply not thinking about you. He's engaging a complex psychological mechanism that reveals deep aspects of his personality, his deepest fears, and his relationship with power itself. What you're about to discover in this analysis will forever change how you interpret these signals. The first psychological pattern we'll examine is perhaps the most devastating: emotional erasure. If you want to keep exploring the hidden secrets of male behavior through Freud's revolutionary insights, hit that subscribe button and prepare to see relationship dynamics through a completely new lens. Recognize this immediately. When a man ignores you, the first thing happening in his psyche is emotional erasure. This isn't mere distraction or lack of time. It's a deliberate, unconscious process through which he temporarily deletes every trace of the feelings he has for you. Imagine that you and he have shared intense moments, deep conversations, maybe even physical intimacy. Suddenly, all of this vanishes from his behavior. He greets you as if it's the first time you've ever met. His eyes betray no memory of what you've experienced together. It's almost like you've become completely transparent to him. Freud called this mechanism repression, one of the most powerful defense mechanisms of the human mind. When a man feels emotionally overwhelmed, threatened by the vulnerability you represent, or frightened by the intensity of his own feelings, his unconscious activates a radical protection system. He pretends those feelings don't exist. He's not consciously controlling them. He's literally erasing them from his conscious experience. But here's the truth Freud revealed to us. What gets repressed never truly disappears. It hides in the unconscious, where it continues to influence behavior in subtle but powerful ways. When that man ignores you with that unnatural coldness, he's actually working incredibly hard to keep buried the feelings that terrify him. The more intense the indifference appears, the stronger the emotions he's probably suppressing actually are. Emotional erasure manifests in specific behaviors. He responds to your messages with single words, avoids direct eye contact, doesn't remember details from conversations that were meaningful to you. It's as if he's installed a mental filter that blocks everything related to emotional connection with you. This process serves a precise function in male psychology, preserving the sense of control. Many men have been raised to believe that admitting deep feelings equals losing power. So when they find themselves facing genuine emotions, repression becomes their psychological survival tool. Have you ever seen this pattern in someone you know? That feeling of talking to an emotional wall where there used to be warmth and connection. But repression is just the beginning. There's something even more disturbing that happens when a man activates the second mechanism. Don't miss this second crucial signal: projection of aggression. When a man can't handle his own conflicted feelings, he begins projecting onto you all the negative emotions he refuses to acknowledge in himself. Imagine this situation. After days of silence, he suddenly accuses you of being too invasive, dramatic, or attention-seeking. He tells you that you always make everything a big deal, or that you can't be alone. His words hit you like slaps, but there's something strange about those accusations. They don't match the reality of what happened between you two. Freud identified projection as one of the most insidious defense mechanisms. It consists of attributing to others one's own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or impulses. When a man ignores you and then projects his fears onto you, he's essentially saying, "I'm not the one who's afraid of intimacy, you're the one who demands too much." The psychological truth is devastating. Often the characteristics he criticizes in you are exactly those he unconsciously recognizes in himself. He accuses you of being needy because he himself feels vulnerable and dependent on the bond you've created. He calls you dramatic because he's the one dramatizing the situation by ignoring you. He says you always make everything a big deal because he's terrified of the personal tragedy of opening up emotionally. This process allows him to keep his self-image intact while preserving his sense of control. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid of my feelings for you," he prefers to say, "You are the problem." It's easier to point fingers than to look inward. Aggression projection also manifests in more subtle ways. Judgmental looks when you've done nothing wrong, irritated tone when you speak to him normally, disproportionate reactions to simple requests. It's as if he sees you as a constant threat to his emotional stability. Freud taught us that this mechanism is particularly common in men who have difficulty accepting their own vulnerability. In their emotional education, admitting they need someone or have been deeply touched by a relationship equals a loss of masculinity. So they project this weakness onto you, turning you into the scapegoat for their inner battles. The result is devastating. You find yourself defending against unfounded accusations while he frees himself from responsibility for his own feelings. It's a mechanism that can make you doubt your own perception of reality. Can you recognize this pattern? That moment when suddenly you became the wrong one in the dynamic. But there's a third mechanism, even more sophisticated and manipulative, that's about to reveal itself. Prepare to discover the most subtle and cruel mechanism: reaction formation. This is when a man doesn't just ignore you, but actively starts behaving opposite to what he actually feels. Imagine him suddenly developing an exaggerated interest in other women precisely when you're present. He talks animatedly with others, laughs more than necessary, seems almost to want to prove how happy and free he is without you. Or he starts openly criticizing everything he previously admired about you. Your sense of humor becomes childish. Your sensitivity becomes excessive. Your spontaneity becomes lack of control. Freud identified reaction formation as one of the most elaborate defense mechanisms. It occurs when a person consciously expresses the exact opposite of what they feel unconsciously. It's not hypocrisy in the traditional sense. He himself believes, at least partially, in this alternative version of his feelings. The dynamic works like this. His unconscious registers attraction, affection, maybe even love for you. But these emotions conflict with his self-image, with his fears of vulnerability, or with what he believes is right to feel. So his mind constructs an alternative reality where he feels exactly the opposite. The result is behavior that seems authentic, but hides a completely different truth. When he shows you exaggerated indifference, when he flirts ostentatiously with others in front of you, when he criticizes qualities that previously attracted him, he's putting on an unconscious psychological performance. Reaction formation is recognizable by the disproportionate intensity of the opposite behavior. True disinterest would be neutral, calm. Instead, reaction formation produces behaviors charged with emotional energy, even if apparently negative. It's as if he has to convince not only you, but especially himself, of the authenticity of his new feelings. Freud observed that this mechanism is particularly common when the original feelings are very strong. The more intense the repressed affection, the more dramatic the manifestation of its opposite will be. That man who suddenly treats you as if you were the last person in the world he'd want to see might be exactly the one who feels more intensely than he can admit. The cruelty of this mechanism lies in the fact that it creates a double wound. Not only are you ignored, but you're actively rejected through behaviors that seem to demonstrate how little you mean to him. It's like being hit by a weapon that uses the force of your own affection against you. The paradox is that often these men come back later, sometimes years after, admitting they always felt something. But at the moment they activate reaction formation, they're completely convinced of the truth of the opposite feelings they're expressing. Have you ever experienced this sudden transformation, when someone who seemed to appreciate you suddenly became critical of everything you are? But we haven't yet seen the most disturbing mechanism, the one that transforms ignoring into an instrument of power. Now we face the most disturbing truth: unconscious psychological sadism. When a man ignores you, part of him might feel secret pleasure in seeing your suffering, even though he'll never admit it, not even to himself. Imagine this scene. He clearly sees that his indifference hurts you. He notices your attempts to regain his attention, reads the confusion in your eyes, perceives your growing frustration, and instead of feeling empathy or remorse, part of him feels gratified by this power. He's not necessarily conscious of this gratification, but his behavior becomes increasingly calculated to maintain this control. Freud explored the darkest aspects of the human psyche, including the presence of sadistic impulses in all of us. He discovered that sadism isn't just physical, it's often psychological and can manifest in very subtle forms. When a man systematically ignores a woman he knows is interested in him, he might be driven by what Freud called the death drive, a destructive impulse that finds satisfaction in dominance and control. This unconscious sadism manifests in specific behaviors. He responds immediately to others, but leaves your messages pending for hours, shows interest in you only when you're with other men, alternates moments of warmth with glacial coldness without explanations. It's as if he's conducting a psychological experiment to test how far he can push things. The gratification comes from a sense of absolute power. In a society that often makes men feel powerless in many areas of life, emotional control over an interested woman becomes a form of psychological compensation. He knows his actions have an emotional impact on you, and this gives him a sense of control he might not experience elsewhere. Freud noted that this type of sadism is often connected to past experiences of powerlessness or humiliation. The man who today ignores you with calculated cruelty might have been, in turn, ignored or rejected in a painful way. His unconscious mind has transformed that past vulnerability into a need to inflict the same pain on others. The mechanism is particularly insidious because it often disguises itself as independence or not wanting to give false hopes. But there's a fundamental difference between genuine respect, which would be direct and honest, and masked sadism, which is ambiguous and manipulative. Recognize this pattern. He always maintains a thread of hope, a small signal that makes you believe that maybe, if you try harder, if you're more understanding, if you change something about yourself, you could regain his attention. This is refined psychological sadism, giving you enough hope to keep you emotionally invested, but never enough certainty to feel secure. The truth is that this behavior gives him double gratification: the power to control your emotions and confirmation of his desirability through your persistent interest. Have you ever felt trapped in this psychological game? That feeling of being kept hanging by a thread, never close enough, never far enough, but there's still a deeper mechanism we must explore, one that reveals the root of all the others. Here's the deepest and most revealing mechanism: narcissistic regression. When a man ignores you, he's often regressing to an infantile phase of psychological development where he believed he was the center of the universe and everyone else existed only to meet his needs. Imagine a 3-year-old child who, when he doesn't get what he wants, pretends his parents don't exist. He ignores them completely, as if they've become invisible. This same mechanism can reactivate in the adult man when he feels threatened by the complexity of a genuine relationship. Freud described how we all go through a primary narcissistic phase during childhood, where we perceive ourselves as omnipotent and others as extensions of ourselves. Normally, as we grow, we develop the ability to recognize the other as a separate person, with their own needs and feelings. But under emotional stress, some individuals regress to this primitive stage. When a man activates narcissistic regression, you stop existing as a real person in his eyes. You become an object in his emotional landscape that he can choose to notice or ignore depending on how he feels. He no longer considers your feelings, your needs, or your perspective because in his regressive world, only his emotions are real and important. This manifests in specific behaviors. He unilaterally decides when and how to communicate with you, never apologizes for ignoring you because he doesn't perceive he's done anything wrong, only talks about himself when he finally interacts with you, expects you to always be available when he decides to consider you again. Narcissistic regression is particularly common in men who never learned to manage emotional frustration or who grew up in environments where their needs were always prioritized. When they face a relationship that requires reciprocity, compromise, and consideration for the other, their psyche regresses to a simpler model. I am important. Others exist for me. Freud observed that this mechanism is often accompanied by fantasies of omnipotence. The man in narcissistic regression doesn't just ignore you, but unconsciously convinces himself that this is a demonstration of his superior power. He believes he can control the relationship through absence, that he can punish or educate you through indifference. The paradox is that the more he regresses narcissistically, the more he depends on your reaction to feel powerful. He needs you to continue seeking his attention to confirm his imaginary omnipotence. It's a perverse form of dependence masked as independence. This regression explains why these men often periodically return to show availability. In their narcissistic world, they believe you should always be there, grateful for any crumb of attention they decide to grant you. They don't conceive that you could move on or lose interest. Do you recognize this pattern of the omnipotent child? That feeling of dealing with someone who lives in a world where only their moods determine the reality of the relationship? But now we must face the final and most complex mechanism, the one that ties all the others together. We arrive at the deepest and most tragic mechanism, repetition compulsion. Freud discovered that human beings unconsciously tend to recreate painful situations from the past, even when they rationally want to avoid them. When a man ignores you, he's often acting out a script written long ago. Imagine that as a child, he learned that love is something dangerous. Maybe he saw his parents hurt each other emotionally, or he himself was abandoned or ignored by important figures. His childish mind recorded a fundamental lesson. People you love hurt you, so it's better to hurt them before they hurt you. Repetition compulsion now drives him to recreate exactly those painful dynamics. He doesn't do it consciously. It's as if he's programmed to sabotage relationships precisely when they could become meaningful. He ignores you today because he's unconsciously reliving the pain of abandonment he suffered yesterday. Freud observed that this mechanism has an apparently paradoxical function. Through repetition, the mind seeks to master the original trauma. It's as if he unconsciously hoped that by reproducing the painful situation, but this time from the position of power, he could finally resolve it. But of course, this never happens because he's just perpetuating the cycle. The tragedy of repetition compulsion is that these men are often attracted precisely to women who could truly love them. But it's exactly this potential for love that triggers their need to destroy it. It's as if their unconscious said, "Here's someone who could hurt me like I was hurt before. I must act first." This explains why his behavior can seem irrational or self-destructive. Rationally, he might recognize the value of what you have together. But the force of repetition compulsion is stronger than logic. He's guided by an unconscious script written by past pain. Repetition compulsion manifests in specific patterns. He approaches emotionally up to a certain point, then always withdraws at the same level of intimacy, reproduces similar power dynamics in all his relationships, always sabotages relationships in the same way, often precisely when they're going best. Freud discovered that this mechanism can only be broken through awareness. Until he recognizes the pattern and connects his present behavior to past pain, he'll continue repeating the same script with different women. The cruelest side of repetition compulsion is that he himself often suffers from it. Part of him desires love and genuine connection, but he's trapped in a mechanism stronger than his conscious will. He's simultaneously victim and perpetrator of his own unresolved past. This is perhaps the most important truth Freud left us. Until we become aware of our unconscious mechanisms, we're doomed to repeat them. The man who ignores you isn't necessarily evil. He might simply be a prisoner of pain he never processed. Can you see beyond the behavior and recognize the unresolved pain that guides him? This doesn't justify his behavior, but perhaps it can help you understand it and, most importantly, protect yourself from it. Freud taught us that truth is often hidden behind apparently inexplicable behaviors. When a man ignores you, it's rarely true indifference. It's almost always fear disguised as power. But here's the final question you must ask yourself. Now that you know these mechanisms, what will you choose to do? Will you continue to get involved in his unconscious psychological games? Or will you use this knowledge to protect your emotional energy and direct it towards someone who's truly capable of a mature relationship? If this analysis opened your eyes to dynamics you were experiencing, write in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how widespread this experience is around the world. Hit that like button if you recognize at least 3 of these mechanisms in someone you know, and subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the most hidden secrets of human relationships through the lens of psychoanalysis. Share this video with someone who might need these insights. Sometimes, understanding the psychological mechanisms behind behaviors that hurt us is the first step to freeing ourselves from them. Thanks for being part of this community of brave people who don't settle for superficial explanations, but want to truly understand what drives human behavior. See you in the next video to explore other fascinating aspects of the human psyche.